Hello, everyone. Good evening. Good evening. Good evening. Um, it's so great to see everyone tonight. We have an amazing conversation that was been planned for today, and we're very, very excited because this conversation goes directly to why we even have Black diaspora voices, right? Because we want to make sure that as a diaspora, as a Black diaspora, we understand each other, we appreciate each other, and everything that makes us Black diaspora, regardless of where we came from and how we got to this continent and everywhere else in the world. And exciting because as JoJo and I are, children of immigrants, and I'm an immigrant myself, and we've experienced the Black immigrant experience and the Black American experience, but we wanted to make sure that we have represented also born Black Americans who made this land what it is. So before we get into all that, introduce myself. I'm Fatmata Barrie, one of your admins. JoJo.
And I'm JoJo Baron, another one of your admins.
Tamika.
I'm Tamika BW, another admin.
Okay, so we have a special guest and we'll be introducing her soon. We're very excited to have her. But before we get to introducing her, if we can do what we normally do at the beginning of the show, to have a moment of silence for all those who we have lost. And as we know, we have reached the over 500,000 mark of American lives lost during this horrendous pandemic. And it's a depressing time. And let's take just a brief moment to remember our loved ones. And as usual, if you have anybody you want us to remember, you can put their names down on the chat or let us know in the DM. So just for a few moments. All right, thank you. Okay, so Black diaspora voices. And today's topic is bridging the Black American and Black immigrants divide, which I like to call a full divide, or based on full information, rather. So before we introduce our amazing guest, I think I'll let JoJo introduce her for a little bit, and then Nat can really talk about herself a little bit.
Well, you let the cat out of the bag already, Fatmata. Natalie Jackson is a civil rights attorney here in Florida, and she's done some wonderful things throughout the state. Most notably, you know what? I'm gonna let Natalie introduce herself and give you her resume. But the reason why I love Natalie is because we went to law school together. We served together in the Black Law Students Association, and we did some wonderful work together while at University of Florida. And Fatmata was on my team when we had a very, very tumultuous time when, allegedly there were no Black people in this country that were qualified to teach at the University of Florida. Do we remember that, ladies? That was unfortunately the year that I was BALSA president, that my contracts professor stood up in a meeting and said that to other faculty members. And I had the honor of working with Natalie and Fatmata through what was a tumultuous year, dealing with those issues, and all members of BALSA that year. We worked together to put in policies that we thought would help the school long term, and we were earnest and honest and diligent about what we were trying to do. So I got to see firsthand just the hard worker and the spitfire that Natalie is, and continues was back then and continues to be to this day. So Natalie, I am so honored that you agreed to join us today for this discussion. And I thank you so much for coming in, and please introduce yourself to our audience.
So before Natalie,
Thank you.
before Natalie starts to speak, let's just, so you probably cannot see.
Oh,
because
yes.
when you do, oh, there we go. I think we are able to get her in now, video wise, because we were having some technical difficulties. That's why you could not see her before. Yes.
We at least have a beautiful picture now. So thank you, Natalie.
Connecting. So, you know.
Hi, everyone. I'm going to figure this out and we will be able to see everything.
Yay!
So go ahead, Natalie. What about you?
Well, I want to say, first of all, Joanne is being very, very modest because she was our president of Balsa. And she led this, she was like so inspirational to me in Balsa. And that's the Black Law Student Association, for those who don't know. And Fatmata and Joe, I'm just so proud of you guys for doing this. A little bit about me. My name is Natalie Jackson. I'm a civil rights and wrongful death attorney. I'm located in Orlando, Florida. I've worked on some pretty high-profile civil rights cases. Most notably, I was co-counsel to Ben Crump with on the Trayvon Martin case, and I co-counsel with Ben Crump Austin. I co-counsel with him on the Breonna Taylor case. I also co-counsel with him on a current case, Andre Hill out of Ohio. So another person these are mostly police brutality cases. So usually the cases that I'm called in deal with some sort of wrongful death with police brutality. And yeah, I think that's enough. I don't know what else to say. I'm very happy to be on the show.
And thank you so much for joining us, Natalie. You know, we wanted you to come in to speak to, and Tamika and Natalie, we have you guys anchoring myself and Fatmata because we're the two immigrants on the panel. And Tamika and Natalie are the two American-born folks on our panel, so to speak. So we wanted to make sure we had a good balance for this discussion today.
Yeah. So we, I think probably what we want to do, we want to start first of all with maybe JoJo, and sort of speaking on the understanding or some of the misconceptions within the immigrant community. And then we can go into, you know, Tamika talking, you know, about the history. And Tamika has, I just love her family story. And I am so glad to know her because you don't always know people who have family connections to the fight, to the beginning of the fight. And it's really amazing that that we actually have one of our admins that her family was there and continued to make things happen and led to those of us being able to come here and make a life for ourselves and go to school. So JoJo.
Yep.
Guys, you know, I have to get my charger, but I'm listening because I'm going to get my charger, so I'm not leaving, but I'm listening.
JoJo.
All right, JoJo.
So Fatmata and you and I were having a discussion last week, and that's what led us to decide, let's do this sooner rather than later, because it's the whole point of why this group was created. I'm wearing my Kamala Harris shirt. Natalie, you can't see right now, but I have a shirt that says, "Hey, Kamala." And it's my way of welcoming her into the White House, or the vice presidentship, so to speak, because when this group was started, there was a lot of discussion about whether or not she was American enough, or whether or not she was American at all, because her father is Jamaican, her mother is East Indian, and so, but she was born in America, in California, and is American and is qualified and has all the rights to be president, vice president, and eventually president after this administration, God willing. So, it brought me back to a conversation I had a few years ago with someone. And admittedly, I said in this conversation, I don't understand how my parents, who are Haitian, came to this country not knowing English, with, whatever skills they came with from Haiti, because they are educated, but, they didn't have the language skills. And within 5 years, they were able to buy a house and send 2 kids to private schools. But we have Americans who are born in this country, Black Americans born in this country, who have been here for generations, but didn't see the, I guess, quote unquote, success or prosperity that my parents, who hadn't been here 10 years, had seen. My parents came here in the 70s. And by the time they bought a house, it was, they purchased that house in under 10 years. And so I didn't understand the complexities of all that had taken place in this country at the time, where I wasn't clearly tuned into it. But there are a lot of answers to that. And one of the biggest issues, the person I was having this discussion with, brought to my attention something I kind of already knew, was this concept, amongst many others, because there are many, 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 many issues that created this wealth gap, that created this, these issues in this country that makes folks who are born and bred here to believe that they can't or won't, or have stumbling blocks to succeed, where immigrants may not have that mindset in the first generation. And Natalie, we spoke about that the other day, is this idea of redlining. Not idea, but this actual, federal and institutional, private institutions had this whole process where they looked at different communities and they gave them ratings, red being the worst, having immigrants and Black folks living in the communities. They had, there was yellow, and there was green. It was a color-coded system. And those in red communities, the federal government authorized banks to not give loans in those communities, for the sole reason that there were Black people living in that community, and there was no rhyme or reason other than the person's skin color. There could have been a community of doctors, lawyers, all living in that community, but because they were Black, they were not entitled to any type of loans, particularly loans that were backed by the federal government, where before private loans might have given out a mortgage for 10 years, these federally backed loans were now expanded to give folks mortgages for 20 and 30 years. And something that we are all aware of is that home ownership is a form of wealth building. You have equity in your home, you have money you can pull out and actually do other things, expand your home, send your kids to school, invest in other potential properties. And then there was a series of predatory behavior that occurred with regards specifically to mortgages, that impeded the wealth growth, or Black Americans in this country getting, I guess, expanding and growing their wealth. That's just to say that's one small piece or element in a larger discussion that we're going to have many, many, many times over in this group. That's just one piece, and probably the piece we're going to discuss today. But the reality is that when I have a discussion with someone now in 2021, and someone asks me the same question, why is it my family, who came here with minimal amount of funds, with minimal amount of resources or understanding of the American system, within 5 to 10 years, we are doing much, much better than folks who have been here for generations? The answer is many, many folds. And it's systematic, it's systemic, and it's a system that began holding people back, that we have to acknowledge, and that has not been fully acknowledged and fully recognized, beginning with Reconstruction. And actually before, because when you're able to hold people as property and break up their families, and then generations after generations flow from that, there's bound to be repercussions from that. But for right now and for today, we're going to talk about how redlining has affected our communities, how redlining has affected the wealth gap and the wealth opportunities as within a broader system of, you know, the wealth, the issues that we have as a community. You know, Black Americans in America not doing as well over generations versus a first generation immigrant doing what appears to be perfectly great. But, you know, as Natalie noted in our discussion the other day, maybe the second and third generation may not be doing as well or as prosperous in comparison, you know, as their family, as their parents or their grandparents did in comparison. And there are reasons for that as well that we'll get into and we'll discuss. So Fatmata, tell me a little bit about your family's experience coming here, and you know, tell us about what you experienced in terms of just your experience here, and what is your perspective on how it looks like from you as a person actually who's not just a second generation immigrant, but an actual immigrant. What does it look like from your perspective? And you need to come off mute. You're still muted.
I like to be on mute when, because Zoom has this thing where even if you just say, there's a crossover and you can't hear what the person's saying. So as an immigrant coming here, it was different, you know, because I had to learn to not only be an African child, but also be a Black American child at the same time. Because I had my knowledge base from Africa, but coming here, you have certain experiences that tells you that you are Black. And I feel like I was blessed in that I grew up also in communities and neighborhoods where we had Black neighbors, a Black community. So I was able to sort of experience a bit of the Black culture, and so gain some understanding of the Black culture. So becoming an adult and spending more time around immigrants gave me the realization that there were a swath of members of my community who, for one reason or another, had a misconception of the Black American community here, and the ability or a desire to progress or build or work, whatever you want to call it. And slowly but surely, I started realizing the misconception, because on the other side, being around Black Americans, there's the misconception that you know, Africans, at least as far as Africans are concerned, think highly of themselves. They don't like Black Americans. They come here and they just want to take people's jobs, and you know, so I was getting both from each side, and so as I got older and I got more involved in community, and of course I realized there needs to be something done, because I realized there were no conversations were being had between the two communities. And so this misconception on each side continued and has continued. And then, you know, 2020, Kamala Harris is picked to be VP running mate, and all the discussions within the Black community of whether she was Black enough, is she American enough, and those kind of conversations started, and Black diaspora voices came because of that. So those were, you know, just like a quick compilation of, for me, where I came from and how I got to be how I got here, to try to sort of create a space for the Black diaspora voices, so for us to build unity and build strength and power, because that's what it will take for us to get ourselves together. And, you know, I've known Tamika for, was it 8 years? I think.
Yeah, 2011.
Yeah.
2000.
Yeah, 8 years.
Or 9, 10. Oh yeah, for a long time.
Yeah, a long time.
A good enough time. Yeah, so we know one another.
Yeah, we've known each other for a long time now, so that's why I put her into Black Diaspora Voice. And for you, I mean, JoJo, you know, I had no choice. You know, you're on mute, but I had no choice. So anyway, so now we have Black Diaspora Voice and Voices, and we want to make sure that everyone who's in this group feels at home and understands that we're in this together, and we just want to make sure that at the end of the day, we are a stronger people. And Tamika is going to give us a little background and, you know, and her understanding, of course, as a Black American. And Natalie is Attorney Jackson is, of course, going to talk from her perspective as that, but also I think when we talk about racial justice in this country and how not just the redlining, but the racial justice issues, how they intertwine and have impacted the Black American lives and ability to build and grow in this nation. So I will start with Tamika to kind of give us just a little talk as a Black American, being born here, growing up here, and the family that you come from and the fight to up to this point, and then we'll move to Attorney Jackson.
Okay, thanks, Fatmata, for that. So I think, JoJo, you mentioned it, you said, you know, the Reconstruction era, you know, how all the laws just, you know, came tumbling down, and redlining, all that stuff that caused us to not have the full benefits of being American citizens at that time. But it actually goes way before that, because we have to, so now we have this term out there called the big lie. You know, the big lie, we know it is a political lie. It's based on an unnamed person that, you know, I just don't want to mention right now, but a lie that he told that, you know, resounded throughout this country and caused a wave of mistrust in our government, in our systems of norm, and with our, you know, with our neighbors. You know, people mistrust their neighbors nowadays. But for the Black community, the first big lie came during slavery, when we were brought here, and, you know, most of us in the beginning were told you would work and you would go back home. When we then realized, okay, well, that's not going to be the case, then we became enslaved solely based on our race. And that became the system of norm that we had to accept, you know, at some stake, because, I mean, for one, we didn't have the arms to defend ourselves. We were separated. We didn't have the strength in numbers. And so we were literally outnumbered by a system, by very powerful forces that kept us oppressed. So the first big lie in the Black community is that our birthright is illegal, you know, because remember, we weren't even people. We were born with less rights than animals. And so we were dispensable, you know. Our kids were property. We give birth, our child will be taken right away. Husbands, you know, emasculated right in front of our faces, and women, I mean, we lost faith in our own ability to love ourselves and to love our family, to trust our family, and then to try to hold on to our family. So we lost our emotional tie to our own hope for what can be next. So I'll jump forward, and I'm going to go back, and I'm, you know, just to bridge that gap. When immigrants come here, and, you know, Black, white, whoever, you come here with the mindset of hope and optimism. Black people have been living here with a fear of survival and, you know, and oppression. So we weren't greeted the same way. We weren't bred the same way. We weren't reinforced with the same senses of understanding ourselves. So going back to the big lie that we were born basically in, you know, illegal. We didn't even have a status. We couldn't find our own rights. We couldn't, you know, we couldn't do anything. We couldn't walk around free. We weren't even free. So we were born here illegal. We were caught without papers at some point. We were back enslaved again or killed. So it became a survival thing for Black people to say, you know what, don't test those waters, don't ruffle those feathers, stay under the radar. You know, so for us, we had to learn that we're not going to push the waters. I mean, even today, we see that if we protest, we get killed, we get maimed, we get sprayed. Yet another protest is honored as a person's right, as a person's voice that needs to be heard, that needs to be listened to. That's our norm. That has not changed. So now when we talk about how we got to this place today, we have to remember that every single part of American history was literally designed to oppress Black people. From the time we were brought here to the time we were freed, and right after slavery, we had people being elected to Congress. We had people, business owners. During slavery, Black people were business owners. They were millionaires. We had some, very maybe, 0.1%, but they existed. The potential was always there. Opportunities, not so much, but the potential was always there. The problem is, once they realized that, okay, we can be self-sufficient too, we can certainly, put our kids through school too. We did that. What happened? They burned the village, they burned our towns to the ground. They, we were then almost in exile in our own country. So Black people in America, we have never gone up in arms against our country except to fight for our country, against the Confederacy, for the Union, to preserve our country. That's the only time we've laid our hands on this soil in a fight against this country, against the state. We were never the enemy of the state. So during slavery, yes, Black people, when they realized that in Haiti, in France, in other places, people were organizing, people were being liberated. Yes, we too wanted freedom. So yes, we then wanted to fight for our own freedom, but we weren't fighting against our country. When we were then freed, in 1847, on the Cedar Plantation in South Carolina, is where my family comes from. Thurgood Marshall was one of the advocates that spoke to one of our slave plantation owners, Argyle Smith, and he convinced him in Charleston to close his plantation on moral reasons. Argyle listened to him. He was exiled from Scotland. They said, you're no longer a son of Scotland, because he closed his plantation, the Cedar Plantation, which is now a butterfly sanctuary. So my grandfather grew up on that land. My great-grandmother grew up there. So moving forward, we had the potential to always do more for ourselves. My great-grandmother, ultimately a widow with 8 kids, it's very hard with 2 toddlers. I almost lose it every day, just with 2. She had 8 in the rural South, in South Carolina, okay? The dead of the South. She saw that kids from the town were walking 2 miles to 2 miles from, sometimes further, to school. She questioned those norms. She said, this was in 1947, 100 years after our plantation was closed in South Carolina, 100 years later, 1947. She began to question those norms in South Carolina. She said, in Somerton. She said, why do we have to walk and the other ones don't? To make a very long story short, they petitioned at Scotch Branch. They petitioned, the students and the teachers of Scotch Branch petitioned at Liberty Hill Church. And the petition was for transportation. Of course, the county said we don't have money, but yet, Clarendon County, they were bused. So we weren't able to be bused. Then they petitioned for equal supplies and amenities. They said, well, we're not going to pay for that. They had roofs that were leaking. They had, the books that they got from the white schools that were tattered up, torn up, and some missing. So they got in touch with the local field office for the NAACP. Thurgood Marshall then decided to represent the Briggs versus Elliott the Briggs family in petitioning Somerton for those same things. So he had said, here's how you're going to do your petition. You're going to write it up this way. These are your grievances. You're going to organize at Liberty Hill AME Church, which is our family church, founded by a slave, Delane. With my cousins, I have family that's still named after him in honor of him today. They petitioned and it was struck down the first time. They continued to organize. They got the teachers, the parents, the communities to sign that petition. And they said, well, we feel like we should have the same thing as white people. And we know that at the time it was separate but equal. That was the law of the land. There was no equality. It was separate, but you should be equal. My great-grandmothers, the Briggs family and others, they said, we're separate, but we're not equal. That's when Thurgood Marshall picked up the petition and took it around the country. He went to Florida, he went to North Carolina, he went all over the country, and he ended up in Tulsa, which had the largest school district of Black people in the country. That's where the petition landed. That's what Board of Education was argued. And now we have integration with public spaces, where you can now go to a courthouse, you can go to a school, public spaces, which laid the groundwork for integration to private spaces where you can go anywhere else once the Civil Rights Act was passed. So that small town of Somerton, South Carolina, 950 people today, is where it started. So there is no sense that Black people cannot mobilize, that we cannot, that we're apathetic or we're lazy. No, we've literally had every single law in this country against our survival, against our progression, and against our humanity. In spite of all of those laws, we were still able to succeed. We were still able to become Supreme Court justices or justices because we have to. We were still able to become doctors, to become lawyers, to become county council members, to become teachers, to become every single thing that this country allows every other person to dream of in spite of those laws. So it's not that we're lazy. We have literally been oppressed since our beginning, and it shows our great strength that because of how far we've come, in spite of everything else, that we can still say, you don't have to give us anything, just stay out of our way. We know how to take it from there. We have never asked, we have never begged, we have never sat on our front porches and waited for factories to reopen. We have never sat and looked across our yard and hate the person that made it when we couldn't. No, we moved our family, we built our communities, and we tried to survive on our own. Yes, we also have to remember the DARE campaign, war on drugs, another thing that struck us down. Before that, we weren't that bad off. The crack epidemic took us back again. And what did I do? They criminalized drug usage. They went en masse and locked up Black people, Black boys, 10, 15 years for having drugs, where a person who murdered someone was in the same jail as that person and probably got out before them. So we have to remember that there has always been a system of inequality, and not just inequality, but injustice that we have been fighting. But in spite of all of that, we've still made it. So I said all that to say, yes, as a culture, we see people coming in waves from every country, and it has been like that for generations. They come here, they set up shop, they make it. But the price of your life have never been on your success. We were literally told you can't live there, you can't walk in that neighborhood, you'll be arrested. You can't go to that school, you'll be beat up. That didn't happen to people that came here seeking opportunities that we were literally teaching our kids to avoiding opportunities. Don't go to that area, don't walk to that store, don't try to live in that community, you will be targeted. We were teaching, it became a self-perpetuating cycle. We were teaching our own to be afraid of a system that did not accept us.
Thank you so much.
And interestingly, Tamika, you touched on the criminal justice aspect of this, and which is the reason why we have Natalie Jackson with us today. Because she can speak to exactly what she's been going through from as an attorney, dealing with civil rights issues, dealing with inequality from that perspective, and how it's affected not just Black Americans, but as we as immigrants are coming to realize and become more and more integrated in the system, the next generation of kids are becoming more American, more Americanized, and also seeing and also, I guess, internalizing a lot of the things that have already been experienced and lived experiences for generations of Black Americans in this country. We are now seeing, generations coming after these initial immigrants, seeing less success and internalizing more of what's going on in this country in terms of the lived experience of Black Americans. But Natalie, can you talk to us about how social justice plays into what we have been seeing in this country in terms of the wealth gap and inequality in this country that has held us back as a community at large?
Yeah, so social justice, it involves many different things. So it involves the criminal justice system. It involves our economic system. It involves housing. It involves education. It involves all these other things. So Tamika, I really appreciated your rundown. I thought that was great.
Thank you.
And I think what you said, really, I tell everyone, if they want to know about Black America and why we have a disparity in our economic wealth, our education system, our housing system, our justice system, the most concise thing is Ta-Nehisi Coates' article in the Atlantic, and it's called "The Case for Reparations." Reparations is becoming a really big issue in the United States right now. In fact, there's a House bill on the floor that's been on the bill, I guess, that's been on the floor for many sessions. Let's see where it goes, because this time we've had a buy-in from our politicians. So we'll see where that goes. But when we're talking about that, and I'll just I'll make some of the things just very concisely, some of the same points Tamika made, was that when you think about Black America and slavery, when slavery ended, remember, these were people who were told, okay, slavery's ended, but you don't have a house, you don't have any money, you don't have any property that you own or anything. So when that happened, you had people who were still, I think it's so interesting, because to me, this shows the ingenuity and the hard work of American Black people, that from the time that slavery ended to the 1920s, not even 50, well, a little over 50 years later, we had the Harlem Renaissance, we had Black towns, we had Black Wall Street. And this was from a people who had not even gotten an education. The education was illegal. So I think, when we talk about this, sometimes we talk about slavery in a way where people, it was so sad for Black people, they didn't do anything. Slavery was sad. Slavery was horrible. It was tragic. And we talk about some of the things never even mentioned, such as the sexual abuse, such as the molestation of children, such as, all those deviant things that happened in addition to being made to work. So after that, you had Reconstruction. During Reconstruction, you had Black politicians. Reconstruction was right after slavery. You had Black politicians. You had people building their Black towns. Then after that, once that was done, guess what? Jim Crow laws were enacted. Yes. When Jim Crow laws were enacted, that stopped all the progression. So every time Black people progressed a little bit, and I won't even say a little bit, progressed tremendously in America, there was some new law from the government that oppressed them. So after Reconstruction, you had Jim Crow laws. Jim Crow laws said, and you had the Black codes. The Black codes were laws that prohibited Black people from sometimes even working after hours or being in a certain town, from banking. And this was right after slavery. This was how powerful Black Americans were, that the government had to issue these laws because white supremacists felt that Black people were superseding them. So the government kept putting their hands in it. So then you had things like what Joanne talked about, which was redlining and systematic theft of Black homes and property. So there wasn't just redlining where Black people couldn't get loans, even though their money was in the banks. You had actually systematic thefts of homes. You had redlining made it so that you had to live in a property. Well, let's say these properties were Black owned, so it was Black home neighborhoods. They were not ghettos at the time because Black people lived there, but it made it so that you couldn't get home improvement loans, you couldn't get all these things that white people could get, and you couldn't even move out of the area. And trust me, the areas that you could live in as a Black American were not going to be the good areas. I don't care what your profession was. It was not going to be the good areas. So that's what redlining is if people don't understand exactly what it is. Then let's not talk about the medical terrorism that Black people had to face. Women were forcefully sterilized. We had the Tuskegee Experiment where Black men were given syphilis and they were allowed to die. So that's another, and these were government sanctioned medical experiments on Black people that went along with it. Then you had like decades of predatory lending where the banks actually preyed on Black people. So when they finally gave a loan, the loan was 10 times, the interest on their loan was 10 times what a white person's loan was. So let's talk about when you had, after the Depression in the United States was everyone was doing bad. So the government instituted things like the GI Bill, the programs, the work programs where you could get jobs. Well, guess who was not allowed to participate in those government programs? Black people. Even though Black people had to pay taxes that supported those government programs. So now let's get on to, we've talked about the destruction of the Black townships, such as Black Wall Street, Rosewood. And then you go on to even during this time where the government is systemically oppressing Black people, you still had to worry about, as a Black American, being lynched. Over 3,000 Americans were lynched. You had to worry about your child not being able to go to an equal school, even though you paid taxes, the same taxes into these schools. Your child's school was not equal. And the unemployment rate that soared during this time. And then you get to, as Tamika said, you have things like the war on drugs. You have things like the assassinations of our great leaders. Anytime the government sanctioned assassination of our leaders. Today, we still talk about the school to prison pipeline that we are seeing. I represent a young girl right now who was actually brutalized by a school resource officer, which we know police officers adultify Black children more than they do white children. Children as young as 6 years old, Black children as young as 6 years old are seen as adults to many white people. There have been studies on it. This is not me saying it. This is studies on it. So you have these school resource officers in the schools who are arresting children for getting into fights. These are normal things. I'm not saying with weapons. I'm talking about normal fights. They're giving arrest records. Black girls are being arrested 6 times more in schools than white girls who are getting into fights. The statistics are there. Once you are in the criminal justice system as a student, you now are usually suspended from school. You're usually going to go to a special school from there. Once you've been suspended from school, your likelihood of once you've been expelled from school, because that's usually what happens, they get expelled and sent to the Excel schools and stuff like that, the alternative schools. Their likelihood of graduating now decreases. And their likelihood of being arrested again increases. And this phenomenon is very real. These are not things that we're just talking about. And these are going on today. The prison industrial complex has decimated Black families. And it was systemically done. So Tamika talked about the drugs. And what we do know statistically is that Black men and the Black population doesn't use marijuana any more than the white population. However, they are 10 times more likely to be arrested for marijuana than the white population, and sent to prison for the sale of marijuana. This still continues today. These statistics have been around since the 70s. It still continues today. So you have all these forces, and everything that I have mentioned involves some sort of government-backed impetus. So we have all these forces in the United States that are conspiring against Black Americans. And not to say that we're not, I think that we've done a great job in not being victims, because one of the things that I have always said, I remember when we were in law school, I got a job over one of this young white men in our class. He had better grades than me in class. However, I had a background. We were right neck and neck. I had a background as a military intelligence officer before I came to law school. And he wondered why I got a job that he didn't get. And I said, maybe because I was more qualified than you. So that is why those are the things that we deal with day to day. And so, I actually I look at someone like him and with all the privileges in the world, and I wonder, why are we in the same level? And many times I'm surpassing you. So when people talk about Black Americans, I think that Black Americans have, I know that we have built this country. I know that we have fought for many of the rights that many other people enjoy when they come to America. So those are the things I think that people need to understand when we're talking about this. And I guess we'll talk more later.
I want to say one thing, just to back up about the petition. The petition is Briggs versus Elliott. And that's what I was referencing. But also the rights of Black families. We have to remember that Black women weren't allowed to stay home and raise their kids either, that we had to work. If you were staying home, then you had to have a reason. Why are you home? What's your purpose for being home? We didn't have that luxury of making sure that our child went to school every day. So there were so many things that literally systematically kept us in a certain position. But I say that to say, of course, the whole judges, getting kickbacks for keeping, for higher sentencing, just the whole private prison system. You spoke about reparations, and I know we're not going to get into that too much. I'm not sure how I feel about that, because I think the biggest reparation they can do is level the playing field with those who are already arrested. If it's not a felony, if it's not a something like murder or something that's too horrible like that, I think they need to think about, why are these people still in jail when you've been here since you were 16 years old for something that people have committed way before that, and they're out. So I think reparations, it seems like it's a monetary thing. I think if they level the playing field in the justice system, that would be the reparations, and I think that would help us with our future. But I digress on the whole reparations thing. That's another whole talk for me.
And I think my 2 cents about that, since you put it yours. I think that the way you pay reparations, there was a debt owed for the labor, for the theft, for the theft of housing, for the theft of Black bodies. There is a debt owed. When you pay a debt, you don't get to tell the debtor how you're going to pay them. You just repay them. And so,
but is there a blanket? Is that a blanketed system of a dollar amount? Like, that's what I don't understand.
Yes, there are economists that have put a dollar amount on it. The current dollar amount is $4 trillion, and it is that dollar amount based on the 40 acres and a mule that was promised to slaves and never gotten. The current day value with the amount of Black Americans in the United States today.
So with that debt being paid, I still have 2 Black boys who, if they jaywalk or if they're arrested, chances are they're still going to go to jail over a white man that leads an insurrection, who may be told that he can go to another prison, eat vegan food. The system won't help my son with money. Okay. The system, if my son is not alive to spend it, it won't help him. Or if he's not I'm sorry.
I love the conversation, and we will be having a conversation about reparations, where it can be completely laid out, because I think as Tamika and Natalie are talking, there's an there's a cross, right? Because it sounds like we're talking about both reparation and social justice equality. Separate things, And I think when we come back and talk about reparations, and Nat, I would love to have you back. We would love to have you back to talk about the the issue of reparations. And I think that would be something really interesting to have a conversation on, to see.
But mine wasn't either or. I'm saying to pay. If you're going to pay to overhaul the system that can have my child slaughtered at 16 when he won't be able to spend money. Pay for that instead of paying a money, a dollar amount, and he'll never be able to see it because we'll be tied up in court anyway.
I got you. What I'm saying is that that is something that should happen anyway. And it should not be payment for what I have already given you. You need to give me what you owe me, and then you need to also have this corrected and done right, because this is what you're supposed to do right now anyway. So kind of like that. But
one thing, Fatmata, is that it's so interesting because there's an intersection of all these different issues. And so it's so hard to talk about one of these issues without getting in. And this is why I think that, many times it's hard to get to the root of it. So I appreciate just talking about one at a time, with realizing that we are not excluding other things.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Exactly. So, this conversation, like the title said, it's part one. It's part one. There's going to be a lot of parts, because it's not a 1 hour conversation. You can have an entire convention to talk about these things. You can have an entire convention on a yearly basis. You can have an annual convention. And actually had a conversation with someone before about actually putting together these yearly conferences or conventions where we can actually talk about that. So I think we've had a really great conversation, beginning conversation, right? And we are hitting our almost 9 o'clock hour mark. But just very quickly, I think Nat spoke a little bit earlier about the Tuskegee Experiment, because I think what they did was they tested them. They knew they had syphilis, but they didn't tell them. I was supposed to be giving it to them. They didn't tell them, and they allowed them to go back into the community and infect their wives and infected the entire community. And a whole bunch of people died because the government decided we were not going to tell them, and we're going to do an experiment and see whatever. So that's just a little piece of the stuff that was done. And I think this takes us to basically part of what JoJo and I talked about and what brought us to this. And JoJo, this discussion, you're a big part of it. So I want you to close us out, give us a closing statement. If you think what we just did, sort of went into where we were when we were discussing putting this together.
I think this is a great starting point for a conversation we're going to have many, many, many times over. We're going to go into other discussions about reparations, go more in depth into reparations, but this also, this whole issue speaks to other things, such as believing that pulling up your pants is the way to, what is that called? I'm having a brain freeze right now. But just
politics.
Yes. Respectability politics is something I cannot stand and can't wait to talk about, because it drives me bonkers to think that pulling up your pants is all we need to do to get people to respect us, because that's not the answer. The Black family is another issue that we touched on today, but we're going to talk about in more detail. I mean, Black fathers are involved in our families. I think every one of us has had our father involved to a large degree in our lives, as long as they've been here. Natalie, I know yours is a little different situation, but if he was here, he'd still be in your life.
Let me tell you on that, there are statistics on that too. While the Black marriages while there are more white marriages, Black fathers are statistically more involved in their children's lives than any other race in America. So.
And wait, one more thing about that, the welfare system wouldn't allow you to be married and still get benefits either. So, I mean, there's so many other things that contributed to the break of the Black family, not to mention putting them in prison and stuff like that. But
yeah, being in the family.
Yeah.
And I'm saying all this to say that there are so many aspects to this that we as a Black diaspora need to discuss, because part of our divide is not having a clear understanding as immigrants as to what exactly happened in this country that brought Black Americans to where they are, who they are. And even us, we come to this country and within a couple of generations, things look a little different from us. I mean, and this is from personal experience. Just the generation before us is looking much better and was able to acquire more just because of how America works as a society. I mean, the wealth, the opportunities are different for everyone across the board and affects us differently as Black folks and Black folks living here, because no one asked me, are you Haitian or are you Black American? So everything that's happening to Black Americans in this country is happening to me, just the same in this particular generation. And I'm saying all that to say that I'm glad that we had this discussion today, but we're gonna have this discussion many, many, many more times over. And it's gonna take, it's gonna look different, but ultimately every discussion we have that is about socioeconomics, about social justice, about criminal justice, about all of these things, the Black family, male and female interacting with each other as a community, men and women, not male and female because we're humans, men and women interacting with each other. All of this is around our general topic of how do we as a Black diaspora come together and really unify so that we can strengthen ourselves and create a strength and unity amongst us, so that whatever comes our way, we are prepared and we're able to stop these forces from breaking us apart and having us fight each other, because the infighting is where we're going to see probably our biggest detriment, our biggest issues. So, but on that note, I want to move into wrapping us up, but I don't want to leave us on a negative note. I want us to go around the room virtually, and I'll start with you, Natalie, since you're our guest. I want to ask you this: what is something great that has happened to you, let's say in the past week? It could be something as minimal as I lost a pound, or as great as I lost a pound, or something great that happened to you in terms of work or anything at all.
I had a virtual Zoom party that was awesome.
I love those.
Yeah.
Tamika, how about you?
Well, I've been doing a whole vision thing with a few friends of mine. So I've completed my board. I don't know if they have. I'm looking right at it. So if you guys are watching, I hope you have too, because I'll see them on Sunday. So just to be able to look forward to more and sit down and just dream, I think that's a great thing for me spiritually. I think it's good for me to look ahead.
And Fatmata, tell us all a great thing that's happened to you in the last week.
In the last week, I had a video call with my dad.
Yay! Those are always great.
And we had a birthday party for my little niece this past week. The week before, we had one for my nephew. So it was a Zoom party, and they had so much fun. It was just, it was great.
That is awesome. I'm happy to report that my vision is great. I went to the eye doctor today, and I don't need the glasses I thought I've been needing, or that's what the doctor says anyway. So I will be glasses free for the foreseeable future. I'm excited about that. Yay!
Congratulations.
Well, this has been a wonderful, wonderful, wonderful discussion, and I'm so glad we had it. Thank you so much, Natalie, for joining us. And we're always open. We would love to have you back if you're amenable, and we're really grateful you accepted our invitation. And everyone, we want to say thank you for allowing us into your living room, dining room, your computer, whichever it is you're viewing us on. And thank you for watching and listening. And we hope that at the end of this, you got some sort of information. And if it's just a little bit of understanding, and if there's more questions than there are answers, because sometimes when you're hearing something for the first time, you have more questions than you do answers, right? And if that's the case, please do not hesitate to reach out. And we are still praying for everyone, still praying for Texas, because it's still there and it seems like it's never ending. And everyone, we pray that you have a good and safe night and a good and safe week. And we'll see you again next week, Wednesday, on a different topic. But of course, always under the umbrella of Black Diaspora Voices and building our strength and unity and making sure that we are able to move forward and leave something behind for our children to build upon. Thank you very much. And you all have a good night. Thank you, Nat.
Thank you.